Most people think probate is dry paperwork, court dates, and a lot of forms. In reality, probate is full of some of the strangest, funniest, and most painful stories you can imagine. Today, we want to walk you through 7 real world inheritance and probate stories that show just how weird things can get when you try to control money from beyond the grave. And then we'll show you what normal families should actually be doing instead. My name is Dan Kallas. We help families in Southeast Wisconsin navigate probate, downsizing, and real estate decisions when someone passes away. Let's start with one of the wildest examples of control from the grave you'll ever hear. A wealthy industrialist in the early 1900s wrote his estate plan so that his main fortune would not be paid out until 21 years after his last grandchild died. Not after his own death, not after his kids' deaths. 21 years after the last grandchild passed away. He died in 1919. The last grandchild died decades later, and the trust finally paid out in the early 2000s, roughly a century after he died. Who got the money? Not his kids, not the grandkids who actually knew him. The estate went to great grandchildren and even more distant relatives who had never met the guy. Here is the lesson. Yes, you can design long term, multi generation trusts, but when you push control from the grave too far, you often punish the people you actually knew and reward people who barely know your name. For most families, the better move is a simple, flexible trust that protects your heirs, not a 100-year science experiment. The next example sounds like a reality show, the baby making contest. A lawyer in Canada passed away and wrote a clause that essentially said, whichever Toronto woman has the most babies in the 10 years after my death gets a large chunk of my estate. So for 10 years, families actually had more children with that contest in mind. When the dust settled, several women with 9 children each ended up splitting the prize. The whole thing became known as the Stork Derby. On paper, it is clever. In real life, it turned a serious estate into a baby race. The lesson is that you can tie money to behavior. These are called incentive clauses. But when the incentive gets too extreme, you are no longer guiding your family. You are turning their lives into a game show based on your sense of humor. If you want to encourage good behavior, education, work, sobriety, financial responsibility, there are ways to do that without turning your will into a contest. Now let's talk about the dog who became richer than most people. A very wealthy hotel owner passed away and left millions of dollars in trust for her dog while cutting 2 of her grandchildren out of the will. Naturally, the case ended up in court. A judge eventually reduced the dog's trust to a more reasonable amount and redirected more money to human heirs and charities. But the pet trust itself stood. The dog still had a dedicated fund for its care. In many places today, pet trusts are completely legal. You absolutely can set aside money to make sure a pet is fed, housed, and cared for after you are gone. The lesson here is simple. Planning for pets is smart. Trying to turn your dog into a multimillionaire is how you end up on the news and in litigation. For normal families, the right move is usually very straightforward. Name who will care for the pet, set aside a reasonable amount for food and vet bills, and put any extra funds back toward family or charity. There is also a very petty side to estate planning. You may have heard this one. William Shakespeare famously left his wife his second best bed in his will. Not the best bed, not the bulk of the estate, just the second best bed. Other people have done things like leaving money to a spouse only if they remarry quickly, leaving nothing to a particular child while leaving everything to their siblings, or leaving tiny insulting gifts with nasty explanations just to take one last shot at somebody. Here's the key point. If you are competent and you are not breaking the law, courts will often enforce petty, hurtful, and odd gifts. Just because the law will let you be spiteful does not mean it is a good idea. If a relationship genuinely needs to be treated differently, maybe a child you have already helped significantly, you can do that cleanly and respectfully. If you use your will to take shots at people, you are not just sending a message. You are also buying your family years of resentment and often expensive legal fights. Sometimes the conditions are less spiteful and more strange. There are wills where heirs only inherit if they do not do certain things. For example, if they do not grow a mustache, if they do not change religion, if they do not marry a certain type of person. There are other wills where heirs only inherit if they complete a big task. For example, running a marathon, staying sober for a certain number of years, or keeping a collection, museum, or business open. Many of these conditional gifts are legally valid as long as they are clear and do not require anything illegal or blatantly against public policy. But the more complicated the string you attach to an inheritance, the more likely you are creating confusion, hurt feelings, and a probate judge who has to read your mind. If there is a value you care about, education, responsibility, work ethic, talk to an estate planning attorney about simple, enforceable ways to reflect that instead of complex, gimmicky conditions. Not every unusual clause is negative. Some are oddly romantic. One well known entertainer arranged his estate so that his widow would receive a single red rose every day for the rest of her life. After he passed, she kept getting roses daily, paid for out of his estate, and delivered by a florist following those instructions. Is that legal? Yes. Is it romantic? Many people would say yes. Is it practical? That is a different question. The lesson is that your will can be incredibly specific. If you can describe it and it is not illegal, someone will be responsible for carrying it out. But most families are better served by clean, simple documents and letting their loved ones create their own ways of remembering them instead of locking in expensive rituals for decades. And then there are the cases that are not weird because of a funny clause. They are weird because there is no plan at all. You see this in the headlines when celebrities die without a will. Massive estates get stuck in court for years. Families fight over houses, royalties, businesses, and even personal items. But this does not just happen to famous people. Right here in normal neighborhoods, people pass away with no will, no powers of attorney, no updated beneficiaries on their accounts. When that happens, state law decides who gets what. Not you, not your kids, not the person you promised. Don't worry, you'll be taken care of. That is where you see siblings in court against each other, estranged relatives suddenly showing up, and homes sitting in limbo because nobody can agree and nobody has clear authority. Compared to all the bizarre stories we just covered, the least exciting plan, a basic, well thought out will or trust, is actually the best gift you can give your family. So, what do these weird probate and inheritance stories actually teach us? They prove that the law will let you do a lot of strange things with your money, but they also prove that if you do not decide, the state decides for you. If you are here in Southeast Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and Waukesha County, and you have not updated your will or trust in years, or you are dealing with an estate or probate situation and you are not sure what happens next, it may be time for a calm, practical conversation about getting your plan cleaned up. If you found these stories helpful, do three things for me. Number one, hit like so more people see this. Number two, subscribe for more real world probate, downsizing, and housing stories. Number three, drop a comment with the weirdest estate or inheritance story you have ever heard. No names, of course. And if you want your family's story to be boringly smooth instead of viral weird, make sure your estate plan is up to date and actually fits your real life.